support comes from Mosby Building Arts. This year, put your trust in Mosby Building Arts for fresh designs and the elevated remodeling experience you deserve. Inspiration at callmosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. This summer, a St. Louis landmark that stretches 1,300 acres wide, 5 institutions across, and 30 feet deep has a big birthday. Forest Park is turning 150 years old. Squeezing a sesquicentennial commemoration into a single day or even a week or month is incredibly difficult. So to give the occasion proper attention, the Missouri History Museum, which lies within the park's footprint, has an exhibit dedicated to Forest Park's storied past and present. It also aims to inspire visitors to consider their place in the park's future. Today, we're spending the hour talking about the exhibit titled Yours Forever, Forest Park at 150. And to do that, we welcome its curator and Missouri Historical Society public historian, Amanda Clark. Amanda, welcome back to St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks for having me.
So June 24th is the actual anniversary of the opening of Forest Park, and that will mark a century and a half of the park's place in St. Louis, in its history and its identity. Other than its being a milestone year, we're attracted to that. Why is it important that people know and understand Forest Park's history and its legacy?
Forest Park is so important to us because it reflects us, right? Like throughout its history, it has changed alongside with us. It's not the same park that they opened in 1876. It has adjusted to how we use parks and what we need parks to do for us and in different ways. And so that's why it's important is to not just understand the park's history, but how have we changed alongside the park's history.
What was the park like when you first visited?
Yeah, so I first visited over 20 years ago I'm not from St. Louis. I wasn't raised going there. Was a visitor, was brought to the park. And so that was 2004. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. But the person that took me to the park, had grown up here and they were unsure about the safety of the park. And so there was I was kind of confused. I was like, this seems like a very nice new park. And so over time, I have learned why all those things were happening at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. But that's why I moved here. Yeah. Moved to the city was for Forest Park.
For Forest Park. It's an interesting segue into the way that this exhibit opens, and you've curated it. It's called Yours Forever, Forest Park at 150. It begins with a quote from the then St. Louis County Executive Chauncey F. Schultz, back when the city was part of the county. So this is definitely from some time ago. And that quote reads, "I present to you, the people of the county of St. Louis, your own, this large and beautiful forest park for the enjoyment of yourselves, your children, and your children's children forever. The rich and poor, the merchant and mechanic, the professional man and the day laborer, each with his family and picnic basket, can come here and enjoy his own, all without stint or hindrance, and there will be no notice put up, keep off the grass." So what about this quote, Amanda, made it both a natural choice and a deliberate one?
Yeah, Chauncey Schultz, when he said those words in 1876, he basically wrote my exhibit for me 150 years later. And when I got the assignment to do the exhibit, it was non-negotiable. We were starting with that quote, and I wanted to pick apart each of those lines and what does everyone mean? What is, who's welcome in the park? What are they welcome to do? It is such a perfect setup.
Mm-hmm. What did the early days of Forest Park look like, given what we've just heard was, what Schultz wrote?
So the park opens, in 1876. It took about 10 years, though, to get it open. So it was not, a quick idea. It went through the courts. They had to convince people, not just the public, but people that owned land around it, in it, right? There was a lot of legal stuff that had to happen to get it open. But when it opened, it was meant to be not a fully controlled experience, right? You were experiencing nature, you were escaping the quickly industrializing city, which could be very different than Tower Grove Park, which had opened a few years before. That's initially a pretty controlled experience of being in the park, seeing statues, everything was very intentional, whereas Forest Park had a wildness to it that was kept when they planned it.
How much did size have to do with that?
So that was, the original plan for that park, for Forest Park, was 3,000 acres. The person who spearheaded getting it opened, his initial plan was 3,000 acres. So they whittled it back down to 1,300. And they chose a site that had forest, it had a river, it had differing, landscapes, so that you could do a nice balance of wildness as well as some intentionality.
Mm-hmm. So how did people then interact, so to speak, with the park in those early
So in some ways,
decades.
Yeah, in many ways, they interacted in the same way. They would have gone to a picnic. They might have played, some kind of informal sport. Some of the things I think that are pretty surprising to people now is that when the park opened, there was a big hippodrome for racing horse carriages. That's where the History Museum is today. There were originally plans for animals to be on display, an earlier form of the zoo, and it was always intentional that they would have been free to view. So there's some very interesting things that were different, but also still there in the way that we experience the park.
Mm-hmm. To what extent did that language, Chauncey Schultz's words, live up to what went down in real life?
So his language is really intentional, and a lot of the, talking about the day laborer and the lawyer and the day laborer, because leading up to the park opening, it wasn't just getting the park opened, it was also they had to come up with some way to make it more equitable for people that lived in downtown St. Louis to be able to visit the park. And what they ended up doing was in 1874, they came up with a plan to open 2 additional parks that would make it easier for people to access green space. Mm-hmm. So O'Fallon Park as well as Carondelet Park. And they also opened a narrow gauge rail line from downtown that would be more affordable. So he's not accidentally listing different classes of people, and that was intentional in how they designed opening the park.
Mm-hmm. Were there specific barriers that prevented all St. Louisans, or visiting folks for that matter, from enjoying the park?
So in those early days, the barriers were just time and money, right? As to who got to spend time in the park and how they enjoyed it. Later, though, once you start to introduce museums and places with doors, I say, like places that were enclosed spaces, once you started to introduce other things to do in the park, then there were barriers along the lines of race, most clearly, where you're able to exclude and include different people.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the hippodrome. Mm-hmm. As far as attractions go, we're interested in hearing from people who are listening today. What is your favorite attraction in Forest Park? Why do you find yourself returning to it time and again? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. You can also email us at talk@stlpr.org. Continuing with the attractions, our producer Maya Norfleet got to speak with Forest Park visitors last week, and she met Ava from St. Louis and her girlfriend Selena from Florissant. Ava said her love for Forest Park goes back to her childhood.
Forest Park for me just holds a lot of memories. And even like my family, they've been coming here, so it's kind of like a generational thing, and being able to take like my little sisters and cousins here, like, is really like generational for me. And honestly, I just like, I don't love being outside, but I do love being here.
What about Ava's experience as a child, her as an adult, and even this thing about not loving being outside, and Forest Park being a place where she likes to do that? What do you have to say in response?
Such a great quote. It is really, really great, because it just reflects how the park integrates all those things, right? You can go to a play, but also walk past beautiful like it integrates all those. That experience is so multifaceted when you're there.
There have been many attractions that have come and gone in the span of a century and a half. And once upon a time, for example, there was a Ferris wheel at the park and a wooden roller coaster as well.
Well, the wooden roller coaster was outside of the park. It was in the Forest Park Highlands, and we included it in the exhibit so that we could make that distinction that the Highlands were just outside of the park. And the Ferris wheel was part of the 1904 World's Fair, which is pretty big moment in the park's history.
What are some of the other attractions people talk with you about or maybe ask questions around?
The Ferris wheel is probably the most common one that I get questions about. Things that we often talk about are the tourist camps. So there used to be camps on the southwestern corner of the park at different times. There was a Boy Scout camp. There was a camp for people using Route 66. They could also stop in the park and camp for a few days. It's probably one of my favorite things that are no longer there.
Diana is calling from St. Louis. Diana, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks, Elaine. Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
Well, I was listening in my driveway and thinking about how much I love Forest Park. And I mentioned when I called in that I've been going to the park since I moved back to St. Louis in 1991. And it was, in fact, a little more dangerous then. And since then, I've been teaching yoga in Forest Park at the Grand Basin for 19 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've literally been in the park almost every day for 19 years.
And Diana, when you went away, were you looking for something that was akin to Forest Park, whether it was the Forest Park that you knew when you left or the one that you enjoy now?
When I went away, I think I was looking for something a little bigger than Forest Park. I moved to the mountains.
Oh, okay.
And I found an ashram, and that's where I really fell in love with yoga. And I was moved to bring that back with me to St. Louis. And Forest Park is the most beautiful backdrop for yoga and meditation. And my favorite thing is when I am teaching and people just happen by, and I call it Stop, Drop, and Yoga. They just join us.
Diana, thank you so much for calling us. You too can join our conversation. Diana called us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. Amanda, as you hear what Diana has shared and also reflecting on the different attractions people have mentioned to you over time, what in the sum does it reflect to you about the kinds of relationships people have with Forest Park?
I think it reflects how different and how no two people's experience in the park is the same and their connections are not the same. Makes me think of my own children. Like my son, if we were to talk about Forest Park, we're always going to talk about Shakespeare. My daughter, we're going to talk about having sushi on Art Hill. So even within a family, right, everybody has their very specific and different connections to the park.
Do you have a favorite?
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare?
I'm a big Shakespeare
Okay.
and St. Louis fan.
We're going to take a very quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. In the meantime, what is your favorite attraction in Forest Park, and why do you find yourself coming back to it time and again? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. You can also send us an email at talk@stlpr.org. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
and Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. Before we return to today's conversation about Forest Park's 150th anniversary, we have a breaking news update. This morning, the Missouri State Board of Education voted to lower St. Louis Public Schools' accreditation status. The vote comes after the district failed to submit its annual audit on time. The decision to drop SLPS's status to provisional accreditation will bring additional state oversight to the district and could pave the way for the expansion of charter schools, which already exist in the city. More information on this story can be found at our website, stlpr.org, and on St. Louis Public Radio this afternoon. Now back to our conversation about Forest Park's sesquicentennial and a new Missouri History Museum exhibit called Yours Forever, Forest Park at 150. Our guest today is Amanda Clark. She's a public historian with the Missouri Historical Society and the curator of that exhibit. So before the break, we were talking about attractions. One of the other things that draws people to Forest Park is recreation avenues. And one of the sections in Yours Forever struck me. It presents moments when St. Louisans fought for what we might call a greater good, and that sometimes put those folks at odds with the people who ran the park. And one example is how the civil rights movement shaped Forest Park, especially around recreational sports. Amanda, tell us about that.
So once the World's Fair happening in the park, that itself has its own history connected to civil rights and who was welcome into that park. And one of the arguments against having the World's Fair to begin with in the park was that it was a public space that you were going to put a fence around and say who could and couldn't come in. And then after the fair, when they start putting the park back together and they add sports, golf was one of the first big things that they added. They were excluded, even though they were city facilities. They were exclusive as to only white St. Louisans could use them. And so over time, a group of Black St. Louis golfers pushed back, and they were able to gain access to the golf courses. And that story plays out the same when it comes to tennis and to the other sports in the park.
Mm-hmm. We have Dwight, who is calling to join our conversation from Dutchtown. Dwight, welcome to the show.
Hi. Good to talk to you guys.
Yes, thank you for giving us a call. What do you have to share?
Yeah, well, it's family. My father grew up in the city of St. Louis. They lived on Enright Avenue, which is just blocks from north of just a block north of Delmar back in the day. And he and his brother were both attracted to the park's productions at the Muni Opera. Mm-hmm. And now, to give you an idea of the time, this was in the early to mid-20s, 1920s. My father was born in 12. His older brother was born in, I think, 8 or 9. Anyway, they participated in the productions as extras. And in one case, it was a production of Aida at the Muni Opera. Back when they still do opera. I saw on a Houston Opera production there some decades ago. But anyway, they did this every summer for I don't know how many years, 3 or 4 at least, and got a chance to wear costumes and participate in the productions. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was and they did that, and then much later. I had the opportunity to review plays and had my chance to go to the Muni and review productions that were outstanding at the Mini Opera.
Thank you so much for calling with that reflection. So Dwight has brought up, family connections. We heard that earlier from Ava, who spoke with our producer, Maya Norfleet. How much does family come into play when it comes to Forest Park and the place that it has in civic life?
I think especially in the case of Forest Park, is so important because it reflects that intergenerational histories, right? Like people are able to pass down traditions, or they're able to connect to that place because of something an earlier generation did, and they also have that forward vision of what kind of park are we going to have for our children in the future. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of producer Maya Norfleet, she also talked with another person, part of a couple, and these were Forest Park visitors last week. The weather was very nice then, too. And she met Selena from Florissant. Maya asked Selena what she enjoys about Forest Park.
I feel like I can come 100% as me because there's not a lot of spaces where I feel safe enough to display my sexuality, and this is my girlfriend. And here I feel like we can actually kiss and hold hands, and nobody's gonna come up and bother us because there's not a lot of places in North County at least where I can just be me. And here in the Loop, they're my favorite places. I can just be lesbian, and I see other people like me. I see Black women like me, earthy women like me, and I just feel represented.
We also heard from Reem on TikTok. They said, the LGBTQ exhibit at the History Museum last year made me feel so happy and seen. And Reem is referring to the now closed Gateway to Pride exhibit, which we've talked about on this show before. Amanda, how does Forest Park as a meeting place, not only for families, but for marginalized people who also, come with their families, how does that show up in Forest Park history?
It shows up in how people use the open spaces, right? So while, you add in museums, you add in different places that people could be excluded from, you have these open spaces as well that do reflect people gathering and gave spaces for people as, over time, different groups evolved in their identity. It gave place for them to gather. Mm-hmm. And that's still true, I think, in the the southwestern corner of the park where you have a lot of family reunions with Black families, right? They have these big family reunions and those picnic pavilions, which is something that was very important to include in the exhibit for us.
Now, you worked closely with Forest Park Forever, which is the nonprofit arm of Forest Park. What did that collaboration look like in practice around this exhibit?
It was so wonderful. I'm not sure how many emails I was able to send and get amazing answers quickly back, but it was great to share, to have access to an organization that loves the park so much and just lives and breathes it. And so that was such a resource for me as a historian, reflective of the resource that they are for the community as well.
Mm-hmm. And just so you are not speaking for Forest Park Forever, we have another guest to add to this conversation. Anne Grossman is Vice President of Community Initiatives for Forest Park Forever. Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. And there were lots of emails?
Yes. We really are a collaborative organization, and the Missouri Historical Society and the museum are some of our favorites to work with.
Mm-hmm. Now, earlier in the show, we did speak about ways that community has shaped Forest Park, ways that they have worked to ensure that things like those recreational opportunities were available. But what are some examples of what community input in the park looks like today, Anne?
Yes, community engagement and outreach is a critical component of all of our work. It's been around for a very long time in the park. As Amanda had referenced, the park has evolved throughout the decades as uses and utilization has changed. The community needs have changed. And some of the key earlier community engagement would have been the Forest Park Master Plan from 1993 to 1995, where hundreds of public meetings took place to be able to hear from the community what they'd like to see in Forest Park, not only for that current time, but also into its future. Mm-hmm. We are able to keep carrying that mantle forward by any major project or even programming models. We want to be actively and engaged with the community to hear what they desire, what may be keeping them from coming to the park, what would bring them to the park more. Those are all really critical questions, and we are listening to what the community needs are.
One of our colleagues here, Rachel Lippman, who's our justice reporter, she's a St. Louis native, and something that she noted was that Forest Park stands out as an example of what can be achieved through public-private partnership. The drafting of the Forest Park Master Plan in 1995 and the creation of Forest Park Forever have created a structure for ongoing redevelopment and maintenance of the park in a way that enhances the experience of visitors while also protecting the space. And I'm quoting her here. What stands out to you in what Rachel has mentioned?
Yeah, so the deferred maintenance that was happening in Forest Park through the 50s, 60s, and onward was not unique to St. Louis. Most major cities were having to make priorities for more emergent needs at cities, and parks and recreation, unfortunately, sometimes are on the cutting block for that support. And other cities across the U.S. started using these public-private partnership models, New York City being one with the Central Park Conservancy that was formed there, really was a model for Forest Park Forever's incorporation. And we know that it takes these multi efforts and these multi ways to fund the park to be able to sustain it and bring it back, which was part of the master plan process. And those projects from the late 90s through 2004 to 2007 really was over $100 million got invested into the park to make it what it is today. And we are continuing through both the public funding through city tax dollars as well as through private funding are able to continue those projects now and into the future.
Mm-hmm. And to make sure that we're staying in the present or relatively recent, Amanda, your exhibit, Yours Forever, Forest Park at 150, it has data that look at the flora and fauna of the park. And as you were wrapping up the exhibit's content, the EF3 tornado in May ripped through St. Louis, including Forest Park. How up to date is data and info about the living elements of the park in the exhibit?
So thanks to our partnership with Forest Park Forever, we were able to edit that information, which had already had been turned in, and we had to pull it back. And we didn't just edit the numbers. We were also able to add content that gave perspective, not just on the park, but on the storm in general and the impact that it had on the community. So the exhibit reflects the tornado as best we could.
The tornado and what we were seeing with the trees in particular, which we have talked about on this show, trees are also habitat. And one of the things that we see on the walls for this exhibit has to do with those numbers for flora and fauna. But another major inclusion, and one that is striking and eye-catching, is a mural. It's huge, and it illustrates the park through its 150 years. And there are many characters in different period garb, attractions from the past and present. And it's like a seek and find. And one character I found pretty quickly interesting was Charles the Owl and some of his babies. So we caught up with naturalist Mark Lunshaw, who's been tracking Charles for the last 20 years. And he emphasized the importance of Forest Park in getting people connected with nature.
Forest Park is so incredibly important to being accessible to people who may not get as much regular contact with nature. And just for myself, I think I'm a good example of this. I've always been into wildlife, but I found in the early 2000s my interest in wildlife coming up to the forefront. And at the time, I didn't drive. And I thought, well, where should I study wildlife in the St. Louis area? And we're blessed in the entire region with lots of great parks and reservations and conservation areas. But at the time, I lived 2 blocks from Forest Park. And even if I didn't, I could not get to, say, Powder Valley by bus. I couldn't get to Horseshoe Lake by Metrolink. But no matter where I lived, I could get bike, public transportation to Forest Park. So I said, yeah, I'm going to study the wildlife in Forest Park. And even people who live further out will often gravitate to Forest Park because they know there's so much amazing wildlife to see.
And that was Mark Lunshaw, a naturalist who's been tracking Charles the Great Horned Owl in Forest Park for the last 2 decades. And as you hear Mark talking, how is the way that people engage with the park, what they're seeing there, the natural features, as well as other people? What does that say about the ambassadorial role that community members play, that is part of the community in your community initiative role?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that Mark is a volunteer with Forest Park Forever, although he is he's known as the Owl Guy through his naturalist endeavors. Really, we can't do what we do in the park without the community being involved. This year, you mentioned the tornado earlier, we had over 2,500 people within days sign up to get information about how they could help with cleanup. We have between 1,500 and 2,000 volunteers a year that are assisting us in our work. we need the community to be driving some of the activities and the programming that happens in the park. We're a small organization. We can't do everything on our own. And it's through community partnerships and our park partner partnerships that activities are happening in the park that meet the needs of what the community is looking for. And an example would be the addition of the NIC, the basketball courts in Forest Park. Mm-hmm. The community started really voicing that they wanted to see that project come to Forest Park. And we listened to the community through many different engagement opportunities to make that project a reality.
Mm-hmm. We are going to take a very quick break here. We'll continue our conversation about commemorating the 150th anniversary of Forest Park, not only by exploring its past and surveying its present, but we're also going to be talking about possibilities for the future. We also want to hear from you. We heard from Bradley on TikTok, who said, "My favorite recent memory was watching Vertigo for Art in the Park toward the end of 2025. And when the actors made their big on-screen kiss, the inflatable projector screen started to cave in as if it wasn't receiving enough air. The whole audience clapped and cracked up." And also from Star on TikTok, rolling down Art Hill, going to the Muni, the floral competition in the St. Louis Art Museum, renting out the boats at the boathouse, and going to the zoo for free my entire life. We want to hear from you as well. What are some of the things you love about Forest Park? And what are some of the changes you would like to see in the future for yourself and for future St. Louisans? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. Today we've been talking about a St. Louis treasure, Forest Park. This June, the park turns 150. To commemorate the milestone anniversary, the Missouri History Museum has a new exhibit called Yours Forever, Forest Park at 150. With us is Amanda Clark, curator of that exhibit, and Anne Grossman, vice president of community initiatives for Forest Park Forever. We were talking about linking past and present and future, and there are thorough ways to do that. We had a question from Richard in St. Louis. It's a Forest Park history question. Who decided to put a highway in the park? This is Highway 64 or 40. Amanda, you have the answer to that.
I have a vague answer, but yes, I have an answer, and that that Anne was earlier talking about like how that early to mid 20th century, the priorities for city funding, federal funding, things like that were shifting, and parks were easy targets, as were as other exhibits and things have covered certain neighborhoods that were easy targets, but the park was one that that land. People are like, we don't need 1,300 acres, and I'm kind of paraphrasing there. And over time, that went from just a 2-lane road through the park to more lanes, and they took more and more land. And it was interesting in doing the exhibit and studying how people pushed back and how the city tried to try to stop it, and how much power the federal government. It got very interestingly complicated as to how that highway got bigger in the park and what solutions did. They tried to get them to pay more money, or to actually, at one point, there was a plan to open more parks in the city to make up for the parkland that was lost in Forest Park. That didn't happen. So it's an interesting piece of the history for sure.
Mm-hmm. On the note about cars, something that I've always wondered, there is a lot of parking available in Forest Park. Has that been a point of contention ever? I mean, I think it is an accessibility kind of thing, but
So in a lot of the history I do, one of my favorite things to find are problems that we have now that people had 100 years ago, right? And things that we think that this is a problem only we have. When it comes to parking and traffic in Forest Park, it's part of the conversation for well over a century.
Okay. And do you have any insight into this as well?
Yes, we do concur that it has been a challenge. I think St. Louisans also just historically like to park as close as they can to the destination that they are going towards. And that definitely causes some gridlock and some challenges within the park because many of the park's institutions are kind of all in that central area of the park where there's lots of parking that's underutilized, for example, in the east end of the park. Mm-hmm. So there's different ways we've been trying to address that. Metro runs the Hampton 90 bus route through the park. We've run a circulator system in the height of the tourist season in the summer that allows riders to get to their destination without having to move their vehicle, or better yet, maybe don't even bring their vehicle into the park at all. And of course, enhancements to the trails and pathway systems to better facilitate pedestrian and cyclists through the park as well.
Speaking of pedestrians, Sarah on Instagram wrote, they need to improve pedestrian access to the park. With recent pedestrian bridge destruction, I have to walk along a road for 20 minutes to get to a park access point. Very car-centric. Shame. So we talked a little bit about this in the green room. And what is happening with this pedestrian bridge?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that this bridge had sustained significant damage and became too hazardous to keep it open. The city had to use emergency funding to remove the bridge this past fall. And we're very aware that that has been a major access point, especially for people that come from the hospital complex and or the Central West End area of our community. And we are working with the city on some study that's going to be coming up to look at how we can make shorter term improvements to that access and circulation that would be a safe way for people to get into the park, or safer than maybe it is today, as well as what might be longer term. One of the things I'm excited to share is that as part of the Glade project, which is the Steinberg Rink renovation of a 22-acre site, there will be a now fully accessible path system that will traverse the hillside there, that will connect at Children's Place and Kings Highway, and will take you down into the site. Previously, there were crumbling stairs through that area. Those stairs are gone, and it's going to be a fully ADA accessible path that will take you to the rooftop of the pavilion at Steinberg, as well as to the rink level. And that will be opening by the end of 2026. Mm-hmm. So there will be another new way to access. And then in the future, there's also the Brick Line with a Great Rivers Greenway project that will also enter in that east end of the park and make safer egress that can separate from vehicle traffic.
Mm-hmm. We have Fred, who is joining our conversation from Florissant. Fred, welcome to the show.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead.
What I had to add was my Uncle Pete, after World War II, was riding his bike on the cast iron bridge, crossing over this cast iron bridge down near the Steinberg Rink. I believe it's still there. It's kind of tucked away. Very romantic spot. And my Aunt Marie was walking across, and he had to get to know her, and eventually married her. And then I proposed to my ex on the location down, I think it's near the golf course. It's a little waterfall. It's a small waterfall. It's not the one below the Spanish Pavilion. It's a little further away near the golf course. Then also my uncle, the same aunt and uncle, were trout fishing on a tournament there. My uncle caught one that he thought was the big lunker, 3 pounds or better, So he went down. This was back in the 40s or 50s. Globe Democrat had a picture of my aunt. She walked in to the weighing station behind him with a trout that was a half a pound bigger.
I love.
It has, we're near Valentine's Day, so there's a romantic link there, too.
Right. Fred, thank you so much for sharing those anecdotes with us. Clearly a lot of life-changing happenings connected to Forest Park. Amanda?
Yeah, I love that he brought those stories up. So for the last 7-8 years, I've been doing the program I run at the museum does walking tours of the park. And so we interact with a lot of folks, and they love sharing memories. And I have heard of so many first kisses and first dates and some breakup stories as well. But there are a lot of really interesting, romantic connections to the park. I love that he brought that up.
Mm-hmm. We also have from U City, Eric. Eric, welcome.
Thank you very much. You guys have a jewel. We are a Forest Park, and all the institutions there are really a jewel in the crown of St. Louis. And I'm not sure our community really understands and cheers it on at the level that we need to. We're a member of Forest Park Rather. You guys are doing a great job. I'd love to hear, we go hiking in Kennedy. I take Tai Chi at the World's Fair Pavilion, lunches, and Muni Opera. It's just phenomenal. I'd love to hear about how much oxygen is put off into the environment. Many cities are working on their tree cover as a way to make us more environmentally sustainable. And when I drive into the park from the east on Forest Park Parkway in the summertime, I can feel the temperature change as I go down that little ridge into a little valley. Could you tell us some more about that? And I'd love to see you bring forest therapy to Forest Park, just like they have in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you ever so much for all your great work.
Oh, thank you, Eric. Anne?
So, Eric, I can't give you specifics about the oxygen levels and changes due to the sequestration of what trees and vegetation bring to the park. Our park ecologist would be the perfect person to have here to answer that question, and she's not with me today. But if you leave your contact information, I will try to follow up with you off the air. Certainly, the impact of the tornado, which of course was very devastating for our entire community, but the loss of impacts to over 5,000 trees really is being felt in the park. And I appreciate you saying that you noticed the temperature change, because one of the things we noticed this summer is the heat effect that happened, especially along the west and the north kind of central part of the park. The dual path system that is the circular path that's about 5.5 miles. Many areas of that path are now no longer shaded, and it's definitely impacting the experience that our park users have. And our organization with our city partners at St. Louis are in the process of doing replanting and trying to look at some of those priority areas, of which the Skinker Edge as well as the Lindell Edge are priority areas. We're planting trees right now to try to address that issue long term. Of course, it's going to be generations before you have the height of the trees that we lost, but it's part of this succession planning that has to happen. And the tornado just kind of put a little wrench in our plans for the long term. We have to kind of pivot and focus in on that massive replanting now versus over many decades where we were on that track.
And before we forget, Eric, what you've talked about, I think gives us some fodder for a future conversation. So thank you very much for that. And input from the community. We asked you a little bit about that earlier, but what are some of the projects that are currently in the works that reflect strong community participation and voice?
Well, I mentioned basketball earlier, which was, we had a lot of engagement and very thoughtful feedback. One of the things that we learned through that engagement, for example, is many participants started bringing up the idea of incorporating art into the basketball court area. It was not part of that project, but based on the feedback we were getting, it's very exciting that we are working towards installing a mural project later this year. And in the next few days, we will have artist concepts for the public to be able to view and give their feedback on, which will help inform the selection committee that will be selecting the artists. We had 87 artists apply to our call to artists, and we've narrowed it down to, the selection committee has narrowed it down to 3 artists. And I can just share that the designs are really interesting and very uniquely different, and yet met the goals of the project. So be looking for that soon on Forest Park Forever's website. I'm sure we can connect to the NPR site for that. But 2 key projects right now that community engagement has been very critical for the planning of are the Glade project, which I mentioned is the 22-acre site that surrounds Steinberg Skating Rink, which is going to turn into a year-round facility, whereas right now, in the past, more recent years, it's been only open during winter for ice skating and some nominal spring and summer programming. Key to those discussions was bringing back roller skating. We have a very strong roller skating community here in St. Louis that the community may not realize, and that is a high desired activity, along with family activities and having opportunities to do programming in that space. The other project currently also under construction is a refresh of the boathouse, and we did a lot of engagement around what does the community desire in this space. We've heard over the years that they want more outdoor seating. We've heard some people want sit-down service, table service. Some want more of that fast casual. We also know that there's a desire for more private events activities. So this project refresh is actually addressing those issues, along with some back-of-house things. When the boathouse opened in 2004, they were thinking they'd be lucky to, get X percentage of people there, and it's 4 times the number today than where they thought it would be. So the space does need to grow with the utilization that has been the reality of the space after those $100 million restoration projects that happened at the end of the 90s into the early 2000s.
Were there any things that you heard and from the community regarding future plans that have surprised you and your colleagues at Forest Park Forever?
That's interesting. I don't know if I have any major surprises. I think a lot of the engagement just reaffirmed things we've been hearing maybe more anecdotally. There's definitely some we've done some more in-depth engagement in this past calendar year around roller skating to just have a better understanding of what that community desires in the space. And some things that we thought might be great programs, we've learned through that process that maybe that's not the best program idea versus what would make the rink unique. For example, kind of across the board, roller skating community has said this outdoor rink could have live music, which doesn't necessarily happen much at indoor rinks. And so that could make it really unique, for example. And so it's opening our eyes to listening to what the community wants and ensuring that we are bringing them to the table as we're starting to activate those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Amanda, I mentioned the mural earlier, and it stays with me because there is so much going on in there. To what extent is the possible future of Forest Park also depicted in that huge piece of work?
Yeah, the mural is the star of the show for the exhibit for sure, and we're going to have turning that mural into a poster, into puzzles, I think is on the plan. There's a children's book that's going to use the seek and find aspect of it coming out later in the spring. So that mural has taken on a life of its own, but the whole idea behind the mural was the fact that the photographic record does not reflect how every group has used the park. If you just go off of photographs, it looks like Victorians on boats, and you don't get a full picture. And so we went with the illustration idea to show different people using the park in different ways. And so I think that the fact that it has little personal moments as well as big historic moments in it as well just reflects that how the park is for all of us and how it's constantly changing, but also staying the same.
And for you, looking at that mural and experiencing the exhibit, what feeling does it give you about how it sets up the public to understand the potential of Forest Park for the future?
Well, we strongly believe that Forest Park is everyone's shared backyard. It could be your front yard, it could be your backyard, depending on geographically where you're located. But it really is our community's central gathering place. Some very historic moments have happened in the park. The gathering of people post Martin Luther King's assassination, which of course we're coming up on his birthday here, celebration in a week. This was the gathering place where people felt comfortable coming and coming together as a community. I think this park has always had that central gathering space. It's always been where people have come And we want the future of the park to continue to be inviting and welcoming to our community, as well as our visitors from across the U.S. and the world. We have 15.5 million visits that happen to Forest Park in an annual calendar year. And it's both locals and out-of-towners that make the space great.
Mm-hmm. And I would add just a little bit to that. Even at the times when it wasn't fully welcoming to everybody, it still reflects that struggle and how we overcame it and how we adjusted.
Amanda Clark is a Missouri Historical Society public historian and the curator of Yours Forever Forest Park at 150. Anne Grossman is Vice President of Community Initiatives for Forest Park Forever. Amanda and Anne, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
This episode was produced by Maya Norfleet.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.